What's our cash on cash return going to be? And this can be used in a couple of ways, and I'll go through it. But first, let me tell you what the cash on cash return is. This is the metric that calculates the annual percent cash flow generated by the property relative to the amount of the cash invested in the property. So what's that mean? $12,000 worth of rental income on a property, and let's say we're going to have $100,000 invested in it. Our cash on cash return then is 12%. Back to our example. We're looking at a property that has $12,000 worth of revenue yearly, annual revenues of $12,000. Let's say we're buying it for $100,000 and it's a cash transaction. So I'm going to actually put out $100,000 to buy this property. I would have a 12% return on my money. My cash on cash return would be 12%. That's $12,000 of rental income divided by the amount of cash that I'm going to put in the deal, 12%. It's pretty quick, pretty easy math. Again, what do we use this for? We use this to determine, is this something that we want to look further at? Is this a good enough return? And so at 12%, we're thinking a 12% return. That's generally pretty good. Really good cash on cash returns, 20% and up. We get really excited. We stop what we're doing and we start to really take a deep dive on things. So if you're looking at the same deal and you think you can buy it for $100,000, but it throws off $20,000 a year annual revenues or rents, then that's something that would get pretty exciting. 25% is something that we're almost certainly going to buy if it's real. Like if we can return our money inside of 4 years, and that's what 25% does for you on cash returns, we're going to buy that. I mean, we're probably going to buy that. If we believe that it's real, that would be something that we would buy. The third one that we're going to talk about is gross rental yield. So this is the metric that shows the property's annual rental income as a percentage of its market value. So it's calculated by dividing the annual rental income by the property's market value. And so we use this one when we've owned something for a longer period of time. This isn't a metric that we use necessarily to determine whether we're going to buy something or not, although you could, but usually you're not going to have so much equity that this figure would matter that much on whether or not it's a good deal. Again, if it's throwing off 25%, going back to the last statement about cash on cash returns, we're not looking at whether or not it's got a lot of equity. But if we've owned that property now, say for 5 or 10 years, now we're looking at what's our return annually, and then we're going to look at what's our return in relation to the gross rental yield. Or so what is our rental income as a percentage of the value of the property? So if we think that we're bringing in that $12,000 a year on rental income, and we believe that the property is worth $250,000 if we sold it as a single family house, but we're still only bringing in $12,000. Now, we may only have $100,000 in the property and we're making a 12% cash on cash return, but we have this $150,000 worth of equity that we need to pay attention to, and it helps to determine whether or not we want to keep that property or we want to sell it on to the next person. And it may actually tell you that the highest and best use is no longer to keep it as a rental property, that the values have gone up enough that it's time to sell the property. Number 4, the fourth thing that we look at to determine whether we're going to buy a rental property and whether or not we're going to keep something as a rental property over the course of time is the net operating income. So this is a big one for us after we have purchased a property and we want to know what the net operating income is, and we want to make sure that we're keeping costs down and that we're running our business well. So the NOI, the net operating income, is a very, very important metric for us. The NOI is the total income generated by the property minus the operating expenses. It provides a measure of the property's profitability before considering financial and tax implications. That $12,000 annual rental income coming in, and you're going to have expenses that come off of that. You may have property management fees, you may have power and water potentially. Hopefully on these small rental properties, you're passing that on to your renter. Sometimes we're not, especially in Puerto Rico. We do some small multifamilies where we've got 1 or 2 meters and we might have 5, 6, 7, or 8 rental units inside of the building. And so we're paying the power and the water, and that would obviously come off of the rental income in order to get us to the net operating income. And I actually like to think about what property taxes are, or the HOA, those things that you would call them financial obligations, but they're expense that's real, and it takes away from you being able to feed your family. So if you have that $12,000 a year in rental income and taxes cost you $1,200 a year, then you're losing $100 a month. And if insurance is another $1,200 a year, that's another $100 a month coming off. And if you've got power and water and that's another $1,200 a year, that's another $100. Now you're $12,000 of rental income just turned itself into $9,000 of net operating income, and you're making less money. You're making $9,000, not $12,000. So number 5, occupancy rate. So occupancy rates are really exactly that. So how much time during the year is your property rented versus how much time during the year is your property vacant. So the metric that indicates the percentage of the time that the rental property is occupied by tenants. A high occupancy rate generally signifies stable rental income and cash flow. We also use this occupancy rate. In fact, we use this occupancy rate much more often when we're determining how we're doing on the nightly rate stuff. So we run our long-term rental income portfolio at about a 90 to 95% occupancy rate. And many years we're up there at 98, 99, 100% occupied. So we will have a window where we've bought something that needs a whole bunch of work. We do the value add investment and we get it to where we can rent it out. And then we find good, stable tenants. And hopefully we keep them for a long period of time. And year over year, we might have, again, 90 to 100% occupancy. And on that long-term stuff, that's what we're looking for. We want to have at least a 90% occupancy rate, as opposed to on the nightly rate stuff, where we've got a small guest house, let's say, and we have 7 rooms that are rented every night. We're really happy if we can be at 60 or 65% occupancy throughout the year. That would be tremendous for us. And we're profitable on those things, oftentimes down to like 35 or 40% occupancy. So just keep in mind that it's a really, really key metric for you guys, especially when you're doing the nightly rate rental stuff. You're going to live and die by your occupancy rate on the nightly rental. Number 6 is the operating expense ratio. This ratio compares the property's operating expenses to its gross operating income, and lower operating expenses relative to income signify a better profitability. For us, we're telling you what we do and how we do it, and we talk about why. We use this ratio when we're looking at the nightly rate way more than we do when we're looking at the long-term rental stuff. The long-term rental stuff should be pretty stable, high occupancy rates. You don't have a ton of costs, as opposed to a guest house. And we do both, guys. So we invest in nightly rental portfolio here on the island of Puerto Rico, and we invest in the long-term rental portfolio, both in the States and here on the island of Puerto Rico. So when we're looking at operating expense ratios, we're looking at them usually as a function of how we're doing inside of running a small guest house or a small hotel. And what we look for is, what is it that we can cut back on expenses? How can we become more profitable, right? We're trying to look for, through this ratio, places where we can save money so that we can become more profitable. Number 7. This is a big one. This is debt service coverage ratio, the DSCR. And so in the States, the DSCR, this ratio is used for lenders to quickly determine how much your property is bringing in annually and compare that to what a bank would kind of willingly and gladly and quickly lend you on the property. So there's something out there called a DSCR loan, a debt service coverage loan, or a debt service ratio loan. And in this, what they're looking for is the property's ability to pay its debt obligations with its operating income. So it's calculated by dividing the property's net operating income by its debt service payments. So you guys know, if you follow this channel very much, we don't have a lot of debt, but we are interested in these debt service coverage ratio loans, especially on the island of Puerto Rico, in order to unlock some capital that we've had out here for now 5-6 years. And we've got it in stable investments that are throwing off positive cash flow and doing really well. And so if we could get a loan that was based on a function of how much money the property's bringing in annually, we would borrow up to something that we feel very safe with. You know, maybe we borrow 65 or 70 or 75% of the value of the property, provided that we have enough income coming in to cover it and that we can sleep at night and we can feel good about it. That would be a safe loan for us. And so it's an important metric for you when you're thinking about borrowing money. It's an important metric certainly for the bank when they're thinking about lending you money. And here's the quick math that you can think about. If you're bringing in $12,000 a year annually, pretty much you could probably borrow up to the point where you're spending $12,000 a year on your loan. So if you're making $12,000 a year, the bank may lend you a loan amount that would have you paying up to about the same $12,000 of debt per year. probably they want it to be, and I think that if you're going to borrow money, you should probably make it safer than that. And instead of going with the 1-to-1 ratio, if you got $12,000 a year of annual income, maybe borrow an amount of money where you would pay out about $8,000 or $9,000 a year on your debt service coverage. So if you did that $8,000 a year in my example that I continue to use, $12,000 of rental income annually, and you borrow enough money that your debt service is about $8,000 a year, that would be a 1.5 debt service coverage ratio. And a bank would probably be pretty damn happy with lending you that money because you'd have plenty of money coming in on your rental property to pay back that loan. So you guys use that to go and determine whether or not you should be borrowing against your property, how much you should borrow against it. When you're borrowing money, be very safe, be very cautious.